Hey, if you live in Mexico or own property in Mexico, then you may have received an email from your bank here in Mexico regarding the US Treasury's decision to stop the transfer of funds from the US to those banks in Mexico. For those of us that pay bills in Mexico, condo dues, housekeeping, the pool guy, utilities, so on, then being able to move money freely between the US and your Mexican bank is pretty important. On June 25th, the US Department of Treasury issued a press release that was titled Treasury Issues Historic Orders Under Powerful New Authority to Counter Fentanyl. You can find the entire press release on the Treasury Department's website, but here are a few parts of it. From Washington. Today, the U.S. Department of the Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, issued orders identifying three Mexico-based financial institutions, CBanco, Intercam Banco, and Vector, as being of primary money laundering concern in connection with illicit opioid trafficking. These orders are the first actions taken by FinCEN pursuant to the Fentanyl Sanctions Act and the Fend Off Fentanyl Act, which provide the Treasury with additional authorities to target money laundering associated with the trafficking of fentanyl and other synthetic opioids, including by cartels. CBanco and Intercam, commercial banks with over $7 billion and $4 billion in assets, respectively, and Vector, a brokerage firm managing $11 billion in assets, have collectively played a long-standing and vital role in laundering millions of dollars on behalf of Mexico-based cartels and facilitating payments for the procurement of precursor chemicals needed to produce fentanyl. In quotes, financial facilitators like CBanco, Intercam, and Vector are enabling the poisoning of countless Americans by moving money on behalf of cartels, making them vital cogs in the fentanyl supply chain, said Secretary of the Treasury, Scott Bessent. Through the first use of this powerful authority, today's action affirms the Treasury's commitment to using all tools at our disposal to counter the threat posed by criminal and terrorist organizations trafficking fentanyl and other narcotics. This press release goes on to spell out why they are blocking these three financial institutions. So I'll read on with what they say regarding Intercam here. When they mention CJNG, that's the Jalisco New Generation Cartel. Okay, back to the press release. The Treasury determined that Intercam, a financial institution operating outside of the U.S., is of primary money laundering concern in connection with illicit opioid trafficking. As a result of its long-standing pattern of associations, transactions, and provision of financial services that facilitate illicit opioid trafficking by Mexican-based cartels, including CJNG. Intercam has also processed U.S.-denominated funds transfers that finance the procurement of precursor chemicals from China on behalf of drug trafficking organizations for illicit purposes. For example, Intercam executives in late 2022 met directly with suspected CJNG members to discuss money laundering schemes, including transferring funds from China. From 2021 to 2024, a China-based company associated with an individual shipping precursor chemicals from China to Mexico for illicit purposes received over $1.5 million from Mexico-based companies through Intercam. Intercam released a response that same day, June 25th, that read in part, "We categorically deny any association between the institution and any illicit activity, particularly money laundering, and reiterate our firm commitment to transparency and legality." Intercam Banco, for nearly 30 years, has operated in full compliance with all regulations established by national and international authorities and in adherence to the principles of anti-money laundering and counterterrorism financing. Intercam continues to operate normally and will continue to support its clients as we always have. We will remain in constant communication with the Ministry of Finance and Public Credit, the Bank of Mexico, and the National Banking and Securities Commission. Okay, 2 days later, Intercam put out another response. Following the recent statements from the U.S. Department of the Treasury and in coordination with Mexican authorities, the National Banking and Securities Commission has implemented a temporary intervention at Intercam Banco. This measure is intended to safeguard clients' assets and ensure the full protection of their portfolios. The intervention will also allow for a thorough review of the institution's practices in areas such as transparency, regulatory compliance, and adherence to anti-money laundering and counterterrorism financing standards. Intercam Banco fully supports this regulatory process and reiterates its complete willingness to cooperate with the Securities Commission as well as with other relevant authorities. Our objective is to collaborate constructively with the authorities, safeguard our clients' interests, and continue promoting transparency and confidence in the Mexican financial system. Okay, so what happened was after the Treasury Department blocked these two banks and the brokerage firm Vector, the Mexican Banking Authority took over the management of CBanco and Intercam in order to protect any creditors. Visa also blocked the debit cards of CBanco, Intercam, and Vector from working outside of the United States. I talked to Intercam, and they're super aware of what's going on and are desperate to find a solution. As of now, there's no way to transfer U.S. funds to these three financial institutions. They can't accept a US-based check if you just walk in there to the bank, and online banking apps like Wise won't work either. When I talked to them, they're optimistic that this would be resolved within a month. They told me they're going through an audit, and as soon as that's complete, they believe the business will operate as it did before. Intercam has 60 locations, and they're popular with foreigners because it's pretty easy to open an account there and generally was easy to transfer funds. They have 2 branches here in the Zihuatanejo area, and then other cities that are frequented by foreigners like Cabo, Cancun, Playa del Carmen, Puerto Vallarta, Mexico City, Querétaro, Guadalajara, Monterrey. But again, it's a small bank, $4 billion in assets. HSBC and Bank of America have over $3 trillion each in assets. So they're 1,000 times bigger than Intercam. HSBC is big in Mexico also. You know, they're too big to fail. You know, if they break a law, they'll pay a fine and move on. It would completely disrupt the global financial system if the Treasury prevented the free flow of funds between either of those banks. In fact, it doesn't take much research to find out that HSBC has been fined several times for laundering billions and billions of dollars. In 2012, HSBC paid $1.9 billion fine after an investigation by the U.S. Department of Justice proved that they failed to prevent laundering by drug cartels. HSBC agreed to be monitored by U.S. regulators for 5 years, but in 2021, they were fined again. HSBC paid those fines and many more, and they're still doing fine. I don't know how much merit there is to these claims right now, but it seems like the focus is on smaller banks, and definitely it's not a lot of money compared to the past investigations. The example the U.S. Treasury cited in their press release for Intercam was $1.5 million received for illicit purposes. The Department of Justice in 2012 found $7 billion in laundered funds transferred to HSBC. I'm not trying to go after HSBC or any of the big Mexican banks because the authorities should enforce the law. It just seems like they're trying to catch goldfish instead of sharks, possibly because of the economic impact that it could have going after the sharks. The good news is that if you bank with any of these financial institutions, then your funds are protected, and hopefully it works itself out here in the next 3 or 4 weeks. Okay, thanks for watching. Take care.